Just before I get into the presentation, and what I'll do at some point is share the screen so you guys can follow along with the information I want to share, is just a little bit of a background on me, so you kind of understand where I come from. I'm a healthcare guy. I've been one for 30 years. Spent a lot of time mostly in not-for-profit large hospital systems in the southeastern U.S., in the Bay Area for 14 years. I ran everything at El Camino Hospital down in Mountain View. And then I've been down in Southern California since 2005, ran a bunch of stuff at Hoag Hospital. And what I noticed along the way is that I was always gravitated and drawn towards special populations. And what that really meant was that I started working with nurses first and noticed that when a nurse was in a treatment program, nobody let her stop being a nurse. And in many ways, she didn't want to stop being a nurse either. And I felt like that was a barrier to getting well. And so was able to create a nurse-only treatment program. Shortly after that, I got asked to run a program for physicians. So I had a physician-only program. The next thing you know, started getting a first responder in, a firefighter in, or a law enforcement officer in, and I noticed the same thing. And that was the idea that, you know, when you still have your uniform on, it's easy to not let down your guard. But when you're in a treatment program, you should be able to let down your guard. But if everyone else is a general population person, they tend to love the firefighter and they tend to be a little wary of the law enforcement officer. And so my idea was to start a first responder only treatment program that could handle post-traumatic stress and addiction issues. We started working on it in 2012. Took several years to get buy-in from departments all around the country, especially in California where our program's located. But essentially by 2018, we created a program. At this point, we have detox residential and outpatient programming for over 45 people. It's a pretty big program. And everyone's a first responder. And what we notice when people walk in the door is they let their guard down. It's like, wait, these are my people. They understand me. I can start to get well. So it's really gratifying for us to be able to do this kind of work. Then from a family background, I come from a mostly military background. My dad was a physician and then was in Vietnam and a combat surgeon. His brother, my uncle, was the director of the NSA for about 7 years and retired as a 3-star. My cousin just retired as a brigadier and was the head of the Army Rangers. I have a DEA stepbrother, and I have 3 firefighter cousins and uncles. So we're a family of healthcare providers and first responders in a lot of ways. And so it's always been near and dear to my heart, and we really see what the problems are. So without further ado, I'm going to kind of jump in and start sharing the screen so you'll just see that from now on. Like the slide says, we're always the first to jump in and take care of the problem. And then we're always the last ones to think there's anything wrong with us. And I think what we need to remember is that there's not a single moment in our careers that spells trouble for us. In many ways, it's an accumulation of things. And then finally, it's a tipping point. So let's try and understand what the tipping points really are all about for us. So let's put things in context. I think if you really look closely, there is a confluence of events that have never really happened before that anyone can remember. We're in the middle of a pandemic that's now having a second surge that's much bigger than the first surge. And for those folks who are working in healthcare in particular, and the ERs and the ICUs are getting overwhelmed again, we know that it's about to have a third surge because Christmas is coming. We get lots of different messages about it, about how to stay safe, about what we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing, what should be open, what should be closed. And unfortunately, there's not a unified voice in how we're supposed to approach this, which creates anxiety for ourselves and for all the people we're trying to care for. We just went through an amazing period of civil unrest, unlike anything we've seen since the 1960s. Here in our program, we had multiple folks coming down from basically battlegrounds all around the country. And they've been out on riot lines. They've been having things pelted at them. They've been trying to hold the line. And then at some point, it just kind of cracks and doesn't work so well anymore. We live in a world filled with isms that We thought in some ways we're going away, but in many ways, apparently we're a little more underground than we thought, whether it's, sexism, racism, you name the ism, it's out there. We're all living in a very fragile economy where on the one hand, it looks like the stock market's going crazy in a really good way. At the same time, there's people who don't have enough to eat and haven't worked in months and months and are afraid that it's all going to be taken away from them tomorrow. We live in a land of disasters. Wherever you are, there's stuff going on, in particular out here in California. It seems like it's fire season is all year round. It's not really a season any longer. And that creates lots of stress and pressure on everybody. And then we're all kind of waiting for the next mass casualty event. Who knows what it's going to be. I think, the disasters back to the disasters with all the hurricane season, the worst one we've ever had. So you put all those things into context and we're supposed to be ready to go and do our job, and we are, but it's on and on and on. It doesn't seem to be going away, and it doesn't feel like any direction we turn, we find safe refuge. It's all around us. The next issue is the big T's and the little T's, like it says. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. Big T's are the big T traumas. Those are the
Dr. Odom, I want to just jump in here. I don't think anybody can see your screen.
Okay.
I can't see it, and I'm getting messages from other people saying they can't see your screen.
Well, I am on the share.
Try it now. Shut it. There we go. Okay.
So now it's all making sense?
Yes. Much clearer now.
Good. Sorry about that. So that's good for everybody now? Yep. So the big T's and the little T's. Big T trauma is the stuff that we all don't really want to think much about. If I mention trauma, virtually every first responder will always remember their very first traumatic experience, where they were involved in something that they just was a little bit too much. But then there was another one, and then there was another one, and then there was another one, and the next thing you know, we've got a big old pile. And when things happen, we just throw another thing on the pile. For some of us, it's a little bit more internalized, and we think about the bucket that we have in our head or the box that we keep, and we just put stuff in there and we don't think about it anymore. And we get to this point where there's both a desensitization to it, and also it can be very sensitized at moments when we weren't expecting it. The other part of trauma are what we call the little T's. And the little T's are more along the lines of all the little annoying things about my job, and all the little annoying things about what happens when I go home, and all the little annoying things about what it is to work with other people. And we don't think about any one of those things being a problem, except now I've got 5 years of it, or I've got 10 years of it, or I've got 15 years of it, and then I've got another big trauma. And so the combination of little T's and big T's are what really get to us over time. And we're really not set up to have the type of resiliency responses that are good for us. So we're going to get into that a little bit. The next issue is our culture. We all know what we signed up for. We all agreed to the contract that said we're going to be in harm's way. We're going to be the first ones on the scene. We're going to handle anything and everything the way it needs to get handled. And so when things begin to trouble us or bother us, or they start to add up, there's a part of us that feels like, well, wait, maybe there's something wrong with me because I knew what I was getting into, and now this is getting to me. But the other part of that is that because we put it all on the line, because we are basically an adrenaline culture, because we have stress chemicals flying through our brain all day long, every day, that when it's time for me, I can pretty much do what I want. I can reward myself in really expansive ways. I can drink as hard as I want. I can party as much as I want to. I can reward myself with an RV or a motorcycle or an ATV or an addition to my house. I can do all those kinds of things because They're very distracting and they're very rewarding. At the same time, over the course of a career, especially when I start buying things, the next thing you know, I live in a cycle that says I have to do all this overtime because now I have to afford all the things that I have. And in many ways, that adding the overtime, while it pays for things, it also takes a toll on me, and I pay an internal price for that. We'll talk about that a bit. I love the saying, 150 years of tradition unimpeded by progress. That's one of the infamous sayings of the fire service. And basically that's that idea that we often have a hard time saying that we need to change or we need to do anything differently. This is just who we are and this is how we do things. And you just get used to it and you deal with it, or you suck it up buttercup, or you move on down the line. And what we're really learning as the science kicks in and tells us what's going on is that there's a whole lot about our jobs that's taken a toll, not just physically, but also emotionally and mentally. And we need to pay attention to that too, or we're gonna have people that are getting injured or going off duty way too soon in their career, which leads to the final stage, which is we either transform or people are dying. And people are dying left and right. And there's a suicide epidemic among first responders. And that's where we really need to make things change, because I don't ever want to hear about another suicide of a first responder when I know we can do things to help them. So speaking of that, I think we need to remember a couple of things. There's basically three really high groups of suicide completers in our population. The third highest group are teenagers. And teenagers, it kind of makes sense why they complete suicide, because they're impulsive, because their brains haven't developed, because they don't think twice before they jump, because they're getting into drugs and alcohol and don't even know how to handle that kind of stuff. And because they have a sense of immortality. They don't really understand that forever is forever. So we see a really high rate with teens. The next highest group are actually single males over age 50. And especially single males over age 50 who are widows. So men who've lost their wives don't do very well, and they have a very high rate. And yet, first responders are a third higher than the highest group. Okay, that's a number we don't want to have. And what we start to notice over time is that, wow, there's a real discrepancy that's starting to happen between suicides and line of duty deaths. In 2017, you see it was relatively even, but then from 17 to 18, it jumped. And then from 18, again, it jumped. And what we're noticing is that the suicide rate's holding really high. And I think the other thing that we could all agree on is that even what we call a suicide is probably grossly underreported, because there's probably a lot of ways people have killed themselves that we get to say it looks like something other than suicide, but we probably realized that it was. And then the other issue, which I noticed in fire, especially 2018, really showed the differences. Look how much the line of duty deaths rate dropped. And what that really means is that we're getting safer and we're getting smarter and we're getting better at doing the jobs that we do. And we're allowing, machinery and technology and those kinds of things to do some of the jobs that we used to have to walk inside and find out about. At the same time, the suicide rate's holding really high. So we've definitely got a disparity in what we're doing, and we need to work really hard on getting the suicide rate back down by treating what's going on in our brain much earlier in the process. I think the other thing, this is kind of a sad slide at this point. I put this together in February of this year, and I can guarantee you that the numbers are wrong in December of this year. So I would probably guess it's about 9.75 to 9.95 out of 10 police officers believe no one understands what's going on with them, that how tough it is out there. It's really rough with officers coming into our treatment center. Every single one of them spends at least 2 or 3 weeks wondering if they ever want to go back, if they can go back. It's not fun to be a cop at this point. It feels like whatever they do, they're wrong in the eyes of the public. And that makes it very stressful and challenging to go to work every day. It also makes it stressful and challenging when it feels like no matter what you do, someone's got their phone camera on, and it's going to be twisted in some kind of way to make it look like they've done something they shouldn't be doing. All this stuff around, police shootings, it's been what this last summer and fall have been all about. And everybody tends to believe there's a deeper problem going on as opposed to isolated incidents. It's really a whole nother conversation, but I think in some ways in law enforcement, we're going to need to look at things a little bit differently. When I see something bad happen and there's an unfortunate event, I tend to automatically think, oh my gosh, what happened to that officer along the way? His PTSD or her PTSD probably is way out of whack, and it caused the event that we see here. So that's the end of the story, not the beginning of the story. And yet we tend to say, no, it was a bad cop. And I think we have to be careful not to use that terminology too much, because that's not really what it looks like. It looks like it's an injured cop. It's someone who something bad happened to. And we can't really use that as our reasoning either, because if we look at other industries, let's say commercial aviation, we've got really great pilots. There's a couple of bad pilots. They're the ones that crash the planes. However, when they crash the plane, there's 200 or 300 other people who die with them. So we really have to have a zero failure rate when it comes to flying planes. And I think we need to shoot that in that direction for law enforcement too, is we need to have as little failure, as little problems as we can. And so there's a lot about the way we need to train our officers differently and better when it comes to resiliency. Just so I mentioned it, I kind of already headed in that direction a little bit. I think the jury's in on body-worn cameras for law enforcement. I think we all agree that overall it helps. We also believe that it's a necessary evil if you don't like them, but it's tended to help cases where we're trying to prosecute, and it's helped with police misconduct to get them out of it more than it's helped to convict them of it. So I think we need to understand it's part of what we are and who we are. And how many of you firefighters have been on a call where a really nice law enforcement officer pointed to his chest and reminded you that the camera was on and kept you from saying something you probably didn't want to say? So we all know that it's there. I think we also need to understand there's a study that came out in 2019 that said that in major metropolitan areas in America, every single citizen is on camera basically 77 times a day. So everywhere we go, we're being filmed. So I think we need to just get used to that idea that whatever we're doing, it's just the way it is. It's kind of ironic, but when I did all my training in psychology and writing notes and doing all those things you did, one of the most important things that ever got told to me by a supervisor a long time ago was, whenever I write a chart note, I need to think that I've addressed it, dear ladies and gentlemen of the jury, because whatever I say can and will be used. And so I think we all need to be aware that that's just kind of the way it is. And how do we do that and not be overstressed about it and not have it impinge on doing a good job, doing what we're supposed to be doing? The next area we'll talk about is what we call the annoying nine. These are those ideas or those situations that we come across on a regular basis that begin to add up. The first one is shift work. Let's admit it. Shift work is not easy. When you're a firefighter and you come on for 24 hours and then you get mandatory for 24 more, and then sometimes you get mandatory for 48 more, and the next thing you know, you've been there 96 hours, that takes a toll on us. We feel like that's just the way we do it, and the payoff is that we tend to get longer periods of time off in between. But what does that do to us when we go home? What does that do to the people at home? So when I've told my spouse that I'm going to do 24 and then I call her and say, no, I got another 24, they work around that. But the next thing you know, I'm there 72. Or the next thing you know, they say, you know what, we kind of don't plan around you anymore. We just do what we need to do. And if you show up, you show up. What's that do for the fabric of my family? How does that affect things over the course of several months or several years? What happens when I plan on being involved in this project or talking about this decision and I can't be there to do it? I want you to wait, but it has to be done. And so you do it anyway. And then I come home and I'm frustrated. The next thing you know, we're at odds, and it's all because of the way I do my shifts. The other issue related to that is sleep deprivation. And there was a study done by the American Medical Association on medical residents. So those are the recent graduates who are, the new young doctors, and they give them 100-hour work weeks. They put them in usually a trauma hospital, and they have to answer the page whenever it goes off. And what the study showed is that every hour, basically every 5 hours over 80, the mistake rate went up. It doubled. So in other words, let's say there was a 1% mistake rate between 80 and 85 hours, it was 2, 85 and 90, it was 4, 90 and 95, it was 8, and then it went up to 16. And so it was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. Everybody kind of freaked out about it. And yet, if you go to any one of those training hospitals where the residents are, they haven't changed their policies at all. So even though we know that sleep deprivation impacts judgment and it makes us have mistakes, no one's done anything about it. The same is true in fire. The same is true in law enforcement, where even though we know there's a problem there, we don't seem to be able to have the resources to change it. A lot of times it's because we don't have enough folks working. We're always in a hiring process, or we've got people out on fires, or we got people on special assignments, whatever it is, there's never enough. When it comes to training, it's whatever we're doing, it doesn't seem to be enough. We've got a new piece of equipment, we're training on it, but we didn't quite get all the way through, and now there's a problem with it. When it comes to, I'm going to tie it into policies. How many times has the COVID policy changed in your department since last February or March? And how crazy making is that? So we're always going back and forth with what's wrong, what's right, how you do it, how you don't do it. It feels like yesterday it was this way, tomorrow, who knows what it's going to be. Technology is great when it works. You guys were talking about that just a little bit before we got started, about what kind of maps do you use and all those kinds of things. And, what's the source of truth here? How do we do it? What's the right way? And then we get down into the whole concept of who we're working with. How many of you guys have been on a bad crew? How many of you have had to pull the weight of somebody else because they weren't consistent? They weren't doing their job the right way. They seemed to be a little lazy. They seemed to be distracted. They seemed to have so much going on at home in their family that they couldn't really be present. Potentially it was someone who had a drinking problem, in the making, or someone who had some PTSD that was beginning to spill over. We don't call it that. We just think it's a guy who's not doing what he's supposed to do. But you're on a bad crew long enough and it starts to affect morale. It makes it feel like the four of us are really just the three of us. Or I used to have a partner in the cruiser and now I don't anymore. It's just me and they're just sitting there. Or I just want to work alone because I don't like being with other people because I can't count on anybody. And those are all elements of adding stress to our job that we don't need to have. It can get to the point where people even seem malicious and they're out to get other people, or they're out to make other people be brought down to where they are. And what's ironic, especially in public safety, is that we all have pretty biting senses of humor. And it can be hilarious, but it's also at a price. And so we all tend to be set up for, if you tell a joke and it really hurts somebody or it digs at somebody, we say, what are you talking about? It was just a joke. But the next thing you know, it's changing things. I think the other thing to remember, though, about humor is a stress management tool, and it's a really good one. And so at the same time as this can be problematic, sometimes the way we used to tell jokes and the way we used to do things is under the veil of a political correctness now. And it feels like sometimes we can't say the things we want to say because we have to be safe and careful. We don't need to say a whole lot about bad calls because we know what those are, but some of them stick. I will say this, that in our experience working with, 1,000 first responders, the bad calls are really the ones where judgment was involved. Those are the ones that get to us and stay with us, where I went left when I could have gone right, or we got there 30 seconds late, or I wanted to do this, but my captain didn't let me, or I got there the wrong way or the wrong direction or the wrong this or the wrong that, or somebody else did. Those are the things where we tend to ruminate over them over the years because it was a woulda, coulda, shoulda kind of situation. And let's talk about leadership for a minute. Anybody had a bad leader? I think if we really put it into perspective, we are working in a paramilitary organization. And one of the things about a paramilitary organization is there's certainly a command structure. And one of the things about the command structure is when we come into the job, part of who we are, especially when we're athlete warriors, is that we want to climb the ladder. We want to go to the next rank. We want to improve ourselves. And obviously there's financial and other kinds of rewards that come with it. But technically speaking, not everyone's cut out to be the leader. And yet a lot of us can take the test and promote and get the next job. And so sometimes what happens is what we call the Peter Principle. And the Peter Principle means that some people are promoted all the way up to their level of incompetence. And so this guy made a great engineer, but then as a captain, he's not such a good leader. Or this guy made a great captain, but as the battalion chief, oh no, watch out. And so we all have to deal with that. And I think the other piece that's really, it's kind of difficult for the person who's in the position is so many leaders started out as part of the team, part of the gang. They were all at the same level. And how do you maintain relationships and continue to rise in the ranks without having people start taking shots at you and seeing all the things you don't do right? So it's kind of a tough position to always be rising from within the ranks. As much as we may say we like that, it's a real challenge for the person who's climbing up. So you start to add these things up over time and it begins to be a real drain on us. Moving over a little bit more on the lines of law enforcement, but it really is, it's everybody. There's something about a line of duty death that gets to all of us. We don't like it, we hate it. It also becomes a really big deal. And I think one of the reasons it's a really big deal is because we've all prepared ourselves to die. Honestly, that's what we do. And so we try not to think about it very much. We just do our job. It's ironic that whenever I do evaluations here, we have several different assessments we use. I have never, ever had a first responder tell me on the questionnaire that says, are you afraid to die? Yes, no one's ever said it. Okay? But when there's a line of duty death, it's that one moment in time where we take our own face and our own life and put it on someone else. And it's a moment of truth. And it's a moment of being really honest about how tough this job is and what could ultimately happen. And I think even for those of us who don't allow those kinds of thoughts, we often see the widow or the widower and we see the family, and that makes us feel really bad for our own families. Most of us know someone who's suicided and completed it. And we tend to have kind of almost a binary response to that. Some of us will say, oh my goodness, I had no idea. And then you think, well, why? Why didn't I have any idea? Did that guy or that girl keep it so closed that no one could ever know? Or was I not paying attention? Or was I just into my own thing? And so then we feel bad about that. And then there's the other side, which is, I think I saw some signs. And then you think, well, why didn't I stop it? Why didn't I intervene? And so then you feel bad about that. And I think the ultimate problem with suicide is it's such a taboo thing. Okay. And I think it's also a taboo thing because how many times have we come on the scene of a suicide? Okay. We know it. We've seen it. It's one of the worst things we come across. And yet when we hear about a colleague doing that, it feels like, oh my God, you were so alone. How could that happen? So we tend to really kind of walk around it and be afraid of it. And it's something we need to learn how to address better among our ranks. All these other things that are on this list here, I don't think I need to get into it a whole lot, other than mention a few things. Everybody who has children will definitely remember the first kid call they went on after their child was born, and how it changed the game. There's something about kid calls that get to us, because again, it's that moment of truth where sometimes when we aren't thinking about it, our kid's face gets put on that other child's body, and we don't like that. Well, I've also noticed that that's starting to happen a little bit more with folks who are having older adults in their families. When you come across older adult calls and you've got a grandparent or a parent, it makes it a little tougher also. I think the other thing I'll mention, and then we'll move on, is just the idea that there seems to be so much media scrutiny anymore that it feels like that makes everything we do that much tougher, that much worse, that much more intense, because we know that it's going to get blasted, and we know that ultimately somebody's gonna look at it the wrong way. Um, Another set of stressors that come along with law enforcement, um, I've kind of rearranged this in the last couple of months, is public sentiment. Just that idea that it's really a little scary to be a cop right now, that if you're out there by yourself, who knows what could happen. I know some departments around here did some training several months ago when the riots really kicked in, basically telling folks that the only place that you can go have lunch or when you're on duty is Subway and Chipotle. And that's because you can watch them make the food. And if you think about that for a minute, that's a really sad statement on where we are. And so if everything is kind of loaded against you, I also hear stories all the time about, making a contact, especially coming up on a motor vehicle. And as soon as the officer gets out of the car, the person sticks their phone camera out and starts filming the entire event, and taunting almost and trying to get something to happen. That's really tough. Then what the public hears versus what we do is often different. Everything about our job is dangerous. It's really tough to arrest people and then have no closure. It's really to not really know what happens, or if you do find out what happens, it usually means that for some, ridiculous reason they got out again, and then I'm going to have to arrest them again at some point. The correction system feels broken, and so oftentimes it feels, as a law enforcement officer, why do I try? Why do I keep pushing? Why do I keep putting myself out there when I'm going to be ridiculed, told I'm wrong? It's not going to matter that much anyway. So there's a lot about morale that needs to get addressed among law enforcement. But let's think about that on a really personal level. What's happening is I'm starting to get this attitude inside me that, I'm prepared for anything. I'm go, go, go. I've got fight or flight ready to rock and roll whenever I need it. And then it doesn't seem to work out. And that begins to be pretty demoralizing after a while. And it creates what we call a sense of learned helplessness. I think in another, in another life, this was just a year and a half ago. I came across this when I was visiting my daughter in Tucson. It's like, this is what we really ought to be doing. We ought to make sure that we are all brothers and sisters and that we're supporting each other. I know we feel that way, but I think sometimes we don't express it near enough. I think we also have to understand what the risk really is. We have the highest rate of occupational injuries of any other occupation in America. For cops, for law enforcement officers, over half of them is from violence. Okay? It's not an easy job. There's a lot coming at us. For firefighters, over 55% is coming from overexertion and bodily exhaustion. We got heart attacks as the number one cause of death. And then closely, it's suicides catching up. The unsung heroes and the folks that people often don't think about are over in dispatch and telecommunications. We have a lot of those folks in our treatment program too. A quarter meet the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. In the general population, PTSD is about less than 3%, maybe 4% sometimes. So look at how much that grows just by being a dispatcher. I know you guys have gone out and seen a movie after you read the book, and you love the book, and then the movie sucked. Okay, why did the movie suck? Well, because your imagination is a whole lot better than that director. And that's the problem for dispatchers in telecom, is they are sitting there listening to everything and then making a movie in their head if they're not careful. And so the things that get imagined are really, really monstrous sometimes. And they're also very helpless and powerless. They're trying to get people there, but sometimes, too many times, they're there all the way to the end before anybody gets there. And that's just a really traumatic experience. Almost 55% are obese, and a quarter have major depression, which is, again, 5 times more than people are supposed to have. So it really takes its toll on dispatch and telecom too. So let's think for a few minutes about what's going on. So when we talk about stress, what are we talking about? We're talking about situational awareness. That's the good term that we use. And essentially it means that I am ready for anything. And when I go on shift and I'm ready for anything, it doesn't mean that my heart is pounding at 150 beats a minute. It means that I am hyper vigilant and hyper aware of everything that's going on around me because I need to be. And when I need to be, it means that a cascade of hormones are flying through my brain. It means that I've got cortisol, I've got norepinephrine, I got noradrenaline, I've got melatonin, I got all kinds of strange things that in some ways almost contradict each other. But the bottom line is, it takes me 12 to 14 hours after I've had an exposure, after I've got myself jacked up because I'm ready to rock and roll and I've done my job, even if I've done it completely calmly, for that stuff to dissipate and get back to a baseline. So the question is, how many times in a shift do I ever get back to baseline? And the answer is never. And then how many times, because I work 5 shifts this week, did I ever really get there? And how about this month? And how about last year? And how about the year before? And how about 5 years and 10 years? And basically, my brain is on fire all the time, ready to rock and roll. And over the course of time, I have these 2 structures in my brain called the amygdala. And those are the things that process danger and emotion. And if they're always being lit up, the next thing you know, over the course of 5 years or more, my amygdalas are now the size of walnuts, and they used to be the size of almonds. And how do I calm that down? That's why I'm hypervigilant. That's why I always sit with my back to the door. That's why when I get home, I'm never actually calm. That's why when I drink too much because it's the only way I can check out. All these are responses to what's actually going on in my brain that has nothing to do with whether I want it to happen or not. It has to do with the fact that I live and work in a very stressful environment. So when we look at this, we kind of look at I don't know why that keeps happening. The post-traumatic stress disorder diagnosis, let's think about you, and a first responder. Have you seen or witnessed or been a part of actual or threatened death or serious injury? Well, that's an easy question. And the question is, how many times? Well, that's not such an easy question because I'm getting up in the hundreds. And yet this means only one time that's intense that could get to me. So in the course of my career, I've had dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of these kinds of exposures and experiences. And then as a result of that, do I experience intrusion symptoms? All that really means is, does that stuff pop in my head when I don't want it to? Does it show up when I'm sleeping? Does it show up when I come near an event that reminds me of that, or is at the same location? Then I move to avoidance symptoms. We do that a lot. Do I kind of go around that street where that accident happened, where that TC occurred, and I didn't really enjoy it very much? Do I stay away from crowds because I don't like to put myself in that position, or the noises make me not able to hear the things I want to hear? Are there other kinds of ways I avoid? Do I get into a pretty pissy state of mind? Do I start to think that everyone's an asshole or a knucklehead? Do I kind of vacillate in my mood? I'm either irritable or pissed, or sometimes I'm down. And then am I having angry outbursts? Am I doing self-destructive behavior? Am I driving my motorcycle at 110 miles an hour down the freeway? Am I drinking way too much? Do I have a startle response, hypervigilance? So just think about you or the person you know. Almost everyone has this. And so in many ways, our very job that we have gives us post-traumatic stress. Okay? And one of the things we like to do with that is kind of change the way we talk about it. So rather than calling something a post-traumatic stress disorder, we call it an injury. And the reason we do that is really just semantics or word choice. But the bottom line is, if we call it an injury, we can get better from it. If we call it a disorder, it means we're broken. So we need to focus on what we can do to make ourselves better. I think the other problem a lot of first responders have is when we think of PTS, we think of combat veterans, and we think of the folks who've been, under gunfire and in the fog of war and all those types of things. And yet we need to really understand that being a responder means that's a fog of war too. There's too many of those events over too many years to not count. I've had a couple guys come in recently who basically said, I don't have any trauma. I said, well, have you had any kid calls? Well, yeah, I've had probably 37, 40 kid calls. Have you had any this? Have you had any of that? They'd had all of them. They go, but I don't have trauma. So then you start to go down the road of, how about this symptom, that symptom, this symptom, that symptom, and they're yes for everything. And by the end of it, they understand that, oh, that's why my head's so tight. That's why I get down. That's why I think sometimes about checking out. And I didn't ever really understand it. I didn't think I had PTS, but I have all those things you talked about. So we really need to do some educating to understand what it is. I think the other problem that we're facing in larger and larger numbers is what we call secondary traumatic stress. And that's the fact that when I come home from work and I won't talk because I don't have anything good to say, or I just need to be by myself for a while, or I'm reactive, or I'm cranky, or I'm whatever I am, that affects my family. And over the course of several years, my family can get a secondary traumatic stress disorder from the things that have affected me. So even if I'm not doing it for myself, I really need to think about how I could get some help or start to learn some resiliency strategies so that I can not give this to my family. I think we need to also understand what it is to be in the family of a first responder at this point. A law enforcement family at this point lives with a negative stereotype. This has been changing gradually over the years, but there seem to be certain events along the way that really push us harder and faster into a new way of looking at things. I can't tell you how many guys are telling me nowadays, one of the things we talk about in my family is we don't tell anybody I'm a law enforcement officer. Why don't I do that? Well, because it's not safe. Because if I do, then I don't know how my kids are going to get reacted to. I don't know how my spouse is going to get reacted to. When we come home and we're having arguments and we're having that 1,000-yard stare and we're not connected, and then we have an argument over it, we think, well, we kept it away from the kids. That's not really true. The kids know. The kids feel what's going on in the family. So I think we need to remember that if when I come home, I'm bringing it all home, even if I think I'm not, and even if I put on my happy face, it leaks over the course of many, many years. And the next thing you know, we're 10 miles apart, and we used to be really close. Now we're going to completely change gears, but we're staying in the world of PTS. Everybody loves brain studies. So this is what this is blood flow and emotions look like in your brain. You can see that this is a normal brain for someone, basically between 28 and 50. This is what it's supposed to look like. Lots of blue means nice blood flow. Red means it's kind of hyperactive, and white means it's white hot, super duper activity going on there. And you notice that a lot of it's concentrated in the cerebellum, which is a really important place for stuff to keep moving. That's close to our breathing center down the brainstem. It has to do with motor control and all kinds of things that just kind of keep the lights on, keep us running. So we like to have it looking like that. A post-traumatic stress disorder brain looks like this. So you notice that the pretty blue's gone. It's not flowing where it should be flowing. It's starting to light up, and we have what's called the brain diamond. And basically, these are several structures in the brain that are all about hypervigilance and anxiety. Essentially, what happens is over the course of all these years, I've diverted all the blood flow because I'm having to stay and pay attention all the time to everything. And so even when I try to turn my brain off, it will not turn off. Even working out only helps a little bit. And I wonder why I can't slow down. I wonder why I'm always ready to bite and I'm always ready to jump. It's because my brain has been changed. Putting them next to each other, which might help a little bit, you can see what a difference there is in those brains. Which brain do you want? You obviously want the one on the right, but on the left, it's because there's so many emotions going on because so much brain stress chemicals are flying around, at every moment of the day. It's tough to imagine ever being able to calm down from that, and yet we have a lot of techniques and things that we can do to help. When our next speaker, Maddie, gets involved, he's going to talk about how some of the things he's learned to do really do a good job of getting our brain back into that cool blue as opposed to the bright red. I love this slide just because it turns out there's a fair number of first responders who are a little OCD, maybe a lot. And you can see what's going on is that basically I'm lit up all over the place, not in a white hot way, but in kind of an overabundance of focus. Everything that's lit up there is a focus area. It involves anxiety, it involves repetitive behavior, it involves my cortex and judgment and trying to decide if what I did was right or if it was wrong or if I got everything done the way I was supposed to do it. And it becomes kind of a lifelong battle of lists and check boxes and making sure everything's the way it's supposed to be. And if you think about our job as responders, we're almost trained into that because it's a constant barrage of lists and checklists and making sure I do all the right things so that everybody stays safe. Back to that idea of what are the symptoms, I think when we take a look at this, you look at all these events or these symptoms, and you can basically kind of do it the other way around. Which ones don't I have? Over the course of a career, a lot of these things start to show up. And as a result, I'm beginning to break down a little bit because I know something's not right with me. I'm not sure how to respond, but I become reactive. And so I'm no longer what I call a first responder. I'm kind of a first reactor. And I barely get my job done, but no one will ever know it's what's going on inside my head. And that stuff gets so tight and so hard and so minute and small that I can't see any other way to get out of this than either drinking it away or medicating it away some other way or taking myself off the planet. It gets to that point because I don't know how to solve any of these because it seems like no matter what I do, it gets worse. It doesn't get better. And that's absolutely opposite of how I see myself because I'm a responder. I solve problems. I do it all day long. I get people out of jams. I save lives. I de-escalate situations no one else can de-escalate, but I can't de-escalate my brain. And that makes me feel awful. Certainly don't have enough time to get into all this, but I just wanted to basically say that one of the problems in first responders is that we have a real tough definition of addiction because we see it every day. We're Narcanning people, we're arresting people, we are seeing people at their very worst. And when we compare what we do to what we see, we don't look like them at all. And so we need to understand that the way we define addiction, it has nothing to do with what anybody else does. It has to do with what happens when I drink, what happens when I use other substances. Does it get me in trouble? And or can I predict every single time exactly what's going to happen? So this could be a whole nother conversation, and it's a really pretty long talk that we could get into. But the bottom line is we live in a culture that tells us to drink to reward ourselves, especially as first responders. We need to self-medicate the trauma. We need to self-medicate the PTS and the anxiety and maybe the depression that's coming along with it. And a lot of us have this stuff in our blood because we were brought up in families that had addiction in it. So that can create a problem too. We also need to understand, and this is where peer support comes in oftentimes, is that everybody talks about you got to wait till the guy hits his bottom. And sometimes we need to raise the bottom and we need to help him see that there's help now and not later. And again, this is part of another conversation that I won't stick with. Also, I want to just kind of put it in context with the general population. 20% of Americans have a mental health illness. A third of the world has depression or anxiety. 60% won't ask for help. And over the past 5 years, more days are lost due to mental health than illness or injury. And that's changed. It didn't used to be like that. It's the number one cause of disability in America right now is mental health. And after this year of COVID, I don't think anybody would disagree because we've all felt it one way or another. When it comes to first responders, it's not 20%, it's 85% have mental health symptoms. 50% will never ask for help because of the culture, because of the job, the stigma that goes with asking for that kind of help. And yet first responders have double the rate of alcoholism, So where it's 12% in the general population, it's 24, 25% among first responders. Most of us won't ask for help because we'll be looked at different. As soon as we say something, we're going to be that guy or that girl, and then we don't want to be that guy or that girl. We don't want to be seen as weak, and we're afraid that we'll never get to promote again. So all those are issues that keep us from asking for help. Other reasons, we just have a culture that says, you know it, suck it up, buttercup. That we don't talk about feelings, that's ridiculous. And if we were to go out in the community, first of all, people would look at us funny, but second of all, who are we ever going to ask for help? Because we don't trust other people. We have a very small circle that we live in. So what do we need to do? Well, first and foremost, we need to be able to train first responder organizations in understanding what this is. We need to help them understand that PTS is real, that alcoholism is prevalent, that we need to change our culture so that we know what to do when the bad things happen, to deal with things as we go along, so it never has to become a full-blown case of post-traumatic stress disorder or injury, that we can work on it now, that we have to have behavioral care access systems so that when that guy or that girl raises their hand, we know exactly what to do to get them there, because we're only going to get one or two chances. Because if I ask that guy and I don't get him to the right place the first time, he's never going to go anyplace again. We need to know what debrief really looks like compared to maybe what it is now, where, we all talk about what happened. It's gnarly, it's bad. And then at the end of it, we ask if anybody needs to take a day off. Does anybody need some time to themselves? And there's only one right answer. The answer is no. Answer, I'm good. Because if you take the time off, it affects other people. So in some ways, we need to come up with a different model for doing debriefs so that it really can be a debrief. We also need to make sure that we're working with people who get us, who are what we call culturally competent. I've started to notice that that's getting used for just about everything. And I think we need to make sure we're really clear on what it looks like for first responders. It has to be people who understand the lingo, who know what it is the way we work, who understand what trauma really is and how we fight it, and how we're tough guys and tough girls who are still, we're still eggs. And so on the inside, we have a soft yolk. If we're not careful, we got to work on it the right way. We also need to understand that peer support is super helpful, but it needs to be trained the right way so everybody feels safe and comfortable that it's a confidential encounter that's going to happen. Like I just said, we got to change the debriefings so that they work. We need to make sure that if we have an EAP in our organization, that it gets first responders. I've seen more and more departments who are part of cities and counties carve off the EAP and come up and work with specialty groups who really understand first responders, as opposed to part of the overall EAP that might be for the entire city. If people do need to get help, they need to get help from organizations that treat only first responders. There's nothing that works very well about putting a first responder inside a general population program. They just don't get what they need and they can't really let down their guard. We need to make sure that associations are involved along the way. They can be the best friend a first responder ever had. They can also force their hand and make sure that they get the help that they do need, and protect them from getting in trouble when it really was about a PTS or a substance abuse problem, that once they get well, get help for it, they're back to rocking and rolling and doing their job the right way. So hopefully you heard a few things that you didn't know before. I think I'm about where I should be with time. Is that right, Devin?
Yeah, you're actually right on time. Imagine that.
Hey, don't be too surprised.
You got 2 minutes. Go ahead.
This last slide is just about some of the stuff we do. I already talked about a little bit. On the right is our first responder wellness program. We treat post-traumatic stress, depression, and addiction only for first responders. We work with everybody's insurance. We do workers' comp claims. It's a pretty amazing place with a really amazing staff who are very dedicated and compassionate about working with first responders. Several of them were first responders and now have become counselors and therapists. Shift Wellness, we like to do a lot of training. We help organizations know what it is to be culturally competent, what it is to put together a behavioral health access program. And then we talked a little bit about the retreats. Sage Retreats is specifically for first responder spouses there's a place they need to go to talk about what life has been like living with their first responder and how much they love it and they're proud of it and they're also frustrated by it. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Devin. Hopefully you heard some stuff. There's certainly lots of ways to contact us if you have other questions. Greg, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to everybody. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Devin.